Why do some Jews reject the idea of Jesus being the Messiah? Is salvation through the Messiah a Christian concept? Well, stay tuned with us on Back to Our Roots and you'll find out.
Well, welcome once again to Back to Our Roots. I'm Pastor Alex Schussler.
And I'm Rachel Hyman, Minister of Music.
And we're so happy that you've joined us once again. Today we are going to be discussing, is Jesus the Jewish Messiah? Boy, I can tell you, Rachel, this is something that going back, knowing what I do now, I would have never thought it when I was younger. If anything, it was exactly the opposite. You know, I grew up in a situation, growing up in a Jewish home in South Florida, where the last thing I would have thought was Jesus had anything to do with the Jewish people.
Exactly.
In fact, as crazy as it is, I remember all the negative things that were said, family members and so on, when they talked about Jesus. And I had this picture in my mind of who Jesus was. And of course, the last thing would have been that he was Jewish.
Yeah.
This picture, that you see all the time of Jesus with blue eyes and blonde hair. I have to tell you, it was quite a shock to me the first time that God led me to the New Testament, and I opened it up and I began to read and heard Jesus weeping over his people, over Jerusalem in Matthew.
It's like, hey, that's me.
And then flipping back the pages and reading in the beginning of Matthew the lineage of Jesus that clearly shows that he's of David and he is Jewish. What a surprise that was to me.
And for most Jewish people,
absolutely.
The way Christendom portrays him.
Absolutely. And that's really a sad thing, because I think that, as a Jew, when God started opening my eyes spiritually, the first place that I should have went was to the Jewish Messiah. And truthfully, after many years of seeking and searching, that was the last place I went. The interesting thing about that is as I looked at all these different religions, as I was awakening, as God was calling to me, I realize now, all the truths, all the things within these different religions that grabbed me as I began to read the Gospels and read Jesus' words, I began to see that all of those truths were contained in him, where all these other religions had little pieces. He was the fullness of it all.
Yes.
So as I said, today we're going to be talking about Jesus, the Jewish Messiah, and specifically we're going to be looking at scriptures, at the Old Testament today. What does the Old Testament say about the Messiah? We're also going to be talking about, from a Jewish perspective and from the ancient rabbinic writings, how did they speak about Messiah? So before we get much deeper into this, we want to welcome, as we do every time,
our Ukrainian friend,
our resident theologian, our brother Alexander Bolitnikov. We call him Sasha. Brother, please come join us. And once again, we welcome you.
It's good to be with you again.
Yes.
Rachel?
How have you been, Sasha? You doing well?
Well, doing fairly well.
We haven't mentioned so far in any of the programs, but Sasha's a proud new papa.
Yeah, my son is almost 4 months old.
Yes.
Mazel tov.
So if he looks a little tired sometimes, that's the reason why. So Sasha, today we're talking about Jesus, the Jewish Messiah. And we want to start exploring, actually, what does the Torah speak in terms of Messiah? And I know that we can go all the way to Bereshit, to Genesis, and really that's the first indications that God has a plan that is going to redeem his people.
Yeah, we can start with the famous statement in Genesis 3:16 about the seed of the woman, and it is interesting how some scholars noticed this expression, which occurs only once in the entire Old Testament, because the woman doesn't have a seed. So,
Right.
and this seed is referred in Hebrew as he. So it's there is some hints already there about an interesting way of dealing with the serpent Satan.
Right, right.
But the main definition of the Messiah comes from the book of Isaiah. Actually, everything about the Messiah
Exactly.
we can find in the book of Isaiah. And Isaiah 61,
Right.
that's the key to understand what this word Messiah, how we say it in English, Mashiach, how it is in Hebrew it sounds, but the English equivalent of it is the Anointed One.
Right.
And what the Anointed One actually indicates, Isaiah 61 says, and it's not Isaiah definitely speaking, because Isaiah wasn't the Anointed One, but he speaks in first person, saying this: the Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, and with him, with the Spirit meaning, he anointed me to bring good news to the afflicted and to declare the Jubilee year.
The acceptable year.
The
which is the Jubilee.
acceptable year, that's where everything is forgiven, all debts, all slaves are let go. So this is actually the definition of the Messiah. Someone has to come who is anointed by the divine Spirit. And this is important because often the rabbis would say, oh, there are many anointed ones.
Right.
The kings, the priests were anointed, but they were anointed with oil. This one is anointed with God's Spirit, and that's why it makes making him the Messiah. Unlike king is a Messiah, one of many kings, this one is unique.
Right. So, not to get way ahead of ourselves, but as soon as you start speaking of Isaiah 61, right away my mind goes to Jesus being called to read from the Torah, and he actually takes the reading from the prophets for that day, and he quotes Isaiah 61. He reads it, but then he says, in your hearing, this has been fulfilled.
Yeah, that was a divine providence, because on that particular Sabbath, we can look up the calendar, the schedule of the prophetic readings which existed then. It was somewhere around June, in the Hebrew month of Sivan, where Isaiah 61, that passage was actually read, and Jesus was right at this time when he was called to read these words.
Right, that's something really interesting that we want you to get a hold of, is that even today, within Judaism, there is a cycle of reading the sections, the Torah portions. The 5 books of Moses are broken up into individual sections, and every week in synagogues all around the world, that same schedule is followed. And there's a reading from the Torah, which is the first 5 books of Moses, and then there's also a reading, what's called the Haftorah, which is from the prophets, a coinciding reading. So, and again, that's on a schedule. Now, the schedule that existed in the first century is different than the one that exists today. But the point of this is that Jesus didn't just walk up and just haphazardly grab the scroll of Isaiah and just roll it until he found the right thing. Oh, that's the thing I want to read to you. No, this day that he walked in was that day of reading. And like you said, it was absolutely God's providence. It was his Father that directed all of this.
And that corresponds to the idea which we discussed about the Jewishness of Jesus, that he was the member of that community of Nazareth that the community knew. He knew how to read, that he would read well, and they have selected him to be the reader.
Right, which again, by the way, not anyone could just walk up and grab a scroll and read. Like Sasha's saying, they would have to have known him and known that he could read, that he could interpret the scripture in the right way. and they would have invited him to come up and read. He didn't just walk in and, excuse me, push his way up and grab the scroll and read, which again even solidifies this idea of how Jewish he was and how he was accepted amongst his people at that time. So let's go back and continue a little bit. How does the Torah now, we go, of course, Isaiah 61, but there is another really important passage in the book of Isaiah that speaks about Messiah in a completely different way, right?
Yes.
And that's Isaiah 53.
Yeah, this passage is talking about, it's so-called the poem of suffering servant.
Right, exactly.
And this was a difficult passage for Jewish people to understand, because when you look at the pattern of how the teaching about the Messiah is developed throughout the scripture, it's always glorious Messiah. And then suddenly, this chapter 53, where there is not a single word talking about the Messiah, but just my servant, and it's just suffering, death. He presented as being a sacrifice for the people, and this is a tough chapter to grapple. But if we look at the way how this servant is presented as a willing sufferer,
Exactly.
then he is presented as the one who makes atonement for the sin of people. We definitely see that it goes beyond just a human personality. It's definitely talking about the Messiah.
Right. Let me ask you this, Sasha. I've heard in the past that there is, within Judaism, within rabbinic teachings, there is this concept that's not talked about very much, but this concept of how the Jews saw that Messiah would come in two ways or would fill two different roles. And I've heard it stated as Messiah ben Yosef, which is Messiah the son of Joseph, and then Messiah ben David, Messiah the son of David. And I've understood that there is this concept of Messiah suffering, as well as the conquering king. Now, before you jump in the answer, I just want to share that I have a Passover order of service that dates prior to World War II. And within that order of service, there is a little passage that asks the question, where will you find Messiah? And the answer says, you will find Messiah outside the gates of imperial Rome among the lame, the suffering, and the beggars. And I always found that, wow, is this alluding to this concept of Messiah ben Joseph, the suffering Messiah?
Exactly. It is interesting that rabbis, even though they did not accept Jesus as being Messiah, they acknowledged the existence of suffering Messiah, afflicted Messiah. And they also, as well as they acknowledged the existence of the glorious Messiah. So unlike the Christians who believe in first and second coming, Jews, the rabbis, believe in two messiahs. The afflicted one comes before the glorious one.
Right. So other than how we're interpreting, I mean, really we're talking about the same thing. And you know, if you go to the first century, then if we understand this idea that there was this expectation that yes, there's a suffering, but also a conquering Messiah, and we put it in the context of the first century and the oppression that the Jewish people were feeling under Rome, it really makes a lot more sense why so many of the Jews, of course not all, because many accepted him, we know that, but there were also many that at first we see when he makes his triumphal entry into Jerusalem, and they're waving the palm branches and crying, Hoshiana, save us. You know, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but
they say, save us, the son of David.
Right, so they're expecting
Messiah the son of David.
The conquering Messiah, and they're expecting that he's going to come in and wipe out the Romans. But what they get instead is Messiah ben Yosef.
Exactly. And
the suffering servant of Isaiah 53.
well, not only Isaiah 53, but there is also very important prophecy, which is Daniel 9.
Okay.
That prophecy specifically says that Messiah shall be cut off. And this word cut off there is basically the same word which was used in Genesis 15 when Abraham and God made the covenant. God cut off the covenant with Abraham. Remember how Abraham prepared the sacrifice and how he cut
it in half, and
in
God
half.
goes through as a smoking fire pot. And
Yeah, and that's a beautiful picture of how God, it was taken from an ancient ritual or ancient covenant treaty when, the defeated party, the defeated king, would walk in between the corpses of donkeys that were cut in half and said, "This is what you shall do to me and your gods shall do to me if I break my covenant, if I break this treaty." So Abraham here expects to see God at the end of this row of animal, waiting for him to pass through with some kind of promises, but instead God in the fire walks between, saying, "I'm going to take..."
But by himself.
By himself.
Right, which is important.
By himself. He says, "If you break the covenant, I will suffer like these animals."
Well, and really, isn't it the fact that God is in that circumstance, he's making a covenant that depends on nobody else.
Exactly.
So nobody can break the covenant. It's all dependent on God, which when we move that forward and we talk about this concept, this idea of suffering Messiah and what Jesus does in programs to come, we're going to talk in much greater detail about this idea of atonement, but how Jesus, as the suffering Messiah, dying for us and making atonement for us is really in effect somewhat of a parallel to what God did in the covenant that he made with Abraham, because this is a promise that at that point he makes that really isn't dependent on us.
That's exactly right. That's exactly what Daniel is driving at, actually saying that the Messiah will be cut off the same way as these animals were cut off by Abraham.
Interesting.
And after that, what's interesting, it gives exact timing that concurs with the date of crucifixion of Jesus. Wow. Through prophecy, we can calculate that. And after that, it says the temple will be destroyed. And truly, that's what happened. The temple was destroyed after that.
Amazing.
So we do have a very clear prophecy, at least for me, as I was going to the synagogue and debated Christians on the topic of Jesus. They couldn't convince me on any prophecy. Isaiah 53, nothing was convincing. I could find refutations, but to Daniel 9, I could not find refutation.
Wow.
Yeah, I know I've heard talked about, if you bring up this idea of Isaiah 53 in a rabbinic context, most of the time, don't they turn that around and say that this is talking about the Jewish people or Israel?
Yeah, that's how you can refute it, although in a context, it's
incorrect.
Yeah, because Israel cannot sacrifice for itself.
Right, exactly.
That's
so Sasha, if we can we talk just a little bit about, if we jump forward to today, I know that there is this Messiah, this messianic idea that exists within Judaism. Can you talk just a little bit about that? What do they see? What do they, today I'm talking about, from a Jewish perspective?
We have to understand that, especially after the Holocaust, and especially after the age of Jewish enlightenment, which happened in 19th century with the creation of progressive Jewish movements, majority of the Jews don't expect any Messiah, any specific Messiah. You talk to Reform rabbis, they'll say, "Oh, we're some kind of messianic age." Only ultra-Orthodox or Orthodox rabbis, they still expect Messiah who will come and rebuild the temple.
Right.
So that's the messianic idea in Judaism today.
Well, and this idea of this messianic age, it's not so much as we understand that, okay, as when Messiah comes, I mean, we're talking about establishing a whole new earth, stepping into eternity as we would understand it, that sin is gone.
And that's what we're going to be talking when we touch about the rebuilding of the temple, that in the prophecy actually that appears to talk about the rebuilding of the temple actually opens up this new perspective, how God will rebuild not only the land of Israel, but the entire earth, making a new earth, a new heaven.
Right. So why is it then, we can look back at the first century and we can see some obvious things, but many Christians will ask, okay, it seems so obvious. You look at the Bible, we look at the prophecies, we look at the New Testament and we go, how can this be anyone but Jesus? And the question is, why is it that some Jews, even though it seems so obvious, why is it they would reject that Jesus is the Messiah?
Well, from the Christian perspective, people take it for granted.
Yes.
You're raised Christian, you've been taught from the childhood, how else can it be? From a Jewish perspective, it is not obvious.
What does it look like to a typical Jew?
To a typical Jew, the major sticking point of Jesus being a Messiah is his claim of divinity.
Exactly.
Because it is very difficult for a Jew to accept that Messiah is God. But this is exactly...
Or you mean like a man is God, or...
Well, that's what they have a problem. Messiah, it's a human, it's not divine.
Right.
And Jesus was adamant about calling himself a divine Messiah. Right. So what we have, and this is interesting, that there is a very famous prophecy recorded in the book of Micah, chapter 5, where it talks about you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, aren't you least among the thousands of Judah? But from you will come the one who becomes the ruler of Israel. And then there is a little statement, whose going forth is from everlasting, from the days of old. This word, the Yamim HaOlam,
right,
from eternity. And that's really divine title.
So if the Jews are not expecting a Messiah in a man-divine form or divine man form, how are they expecting him?
The Orthodox Jews don't have much of a specific idea. They say, when he comes, we'll see.
Yeah, well, I mean, we could really jump off and, there is a sect within Orthodox Judaism, the Lubavitch, that they believe Messiah has come.
And
yeah.
As a rabbi.
And the problem with that is that the Messiah came and then he died.
But it is interesting.
So do they believe he's going to come back?
Well,
how do they answer that?
It is interesting. When you go to the main yeshiva of this group, you will see a huge poster. It says, long live our Rebbe, our Messiah, our King, our God.
Oh.
So...
And so how can they, from the other side, when we say, is salvation through the Messiah a Christian concept? The answer is
really
no.
Not.
No, this is so Jewish in its essence, all the way back.
Exactly. It's just to understand who is that divine Messiah. That's the issue.
Right.
Jesus or Schneer's son?
Alex, so you've got a song for us. Sasha, why don't you tell us about it?
The song is from the words of Prophet Jeremiah, Od Yishama. Again, on the streets of Jerusalem will be heard the voice of bride and the groom.
Od Yishama Beharei Yehuda Uvechutzot ובחוצות ירושלים עוד יישמע בין הרי יהודה ובחוצות ירושלים 고스산 베고심카 고케탄 베고칼라 고스산 베고심카 고케탄 베고칼라 lai la lai la la lai lai la la lai lai la lai la la lai 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 la lai la la lai lai la la lai lai la lai la la lai lai lai. A song shall be heard in the cities of Judah and in the street of Jerusalem. A song shall be heard in the cities of Judah and in the street of Jerusalem. A voice of joy and a voice of gladness, voice of the groom, voice of the bride. A voice of joy and a voice of gladness, voice of the groom, voice of the bride. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. Kohosasan bekosimka kohoketan bekokala kohosasan bekosimka kohoketan bekokala. La 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 la. La 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 la.
Amen. Thank you,
Amen.
Alex. That's beautiful.
What a fun song, huh?
Great song.
You know, someday soon, I pray, Jesus will return, and maybe we'll dance to this
That'd be nice.
with the wedding feast of the Lamb. What a great time that will be.
It will be.
You know, today we spoke about Jesus. We spoke how he is truly not just the Messiah of the Christian faith, but he is truly the Messiah of all.
That's right.
The Messiah of the Jewish people. And we want to encourage you that open up your heart and allow God to speak to you. And it's just been wonderful that you've been with us today. May the Lord bless you and may he keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift his countenance upon you and bring you his peace. On behalf of Rachel and Sasha, we want to say God bless you and shalom, shalom. Join us again.
Yes.